Our prophet. Oh, we're on. Hold on one second. There we go. All right, how's everybody tonight? Nice to see you all. Is this too loud, Hillary, or is this good for the recording? Okay. Okay. All right. Do we have any special intentions we want to remember tonight? That's what we're talking about tonight, the world. We have some of our teachers are really going through it lately, so I'd like to keep them in prayer. Anything else? Oh, this week he's on retreat. And your school has an accreditation this week, so let's pray for Michelle and for the Lord's school community. Anything else? All right. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, gracious Creator God, in thanksgiving for this opportunity, we ask that you raise up those intentions that we've spoken tonight and those that remain unspoken, and ask for your continued blessings on our work, on our desire to do justice, and on all of those who are in need of your guidance. We bring this prayer in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. All right. Any questions about last week? Anything that we talked about last week? Nope? Good? All right. Well, just a reminder, this is our last week together. I don't know if it's still in the bulletin, but this is the last week we're going to be gathering. Anybody have a guess who our prophet is tonight? Moses. Okay, well, we're digging into a written book, so he doesn't have his own written book. So, any other guesses? Not Isaiah, too long. We'd be doing Isaiah for a year. I think I did Isaiah for a year when I worked here. It's a real short one, 3 chapters. Joshua's considered a historical book. Okay, so it's Habakkuk, one of the very, very minor prophets that we don't really talk a whole bunch about. So we're going to look at Habakkuk. I figure if we're going to be off the grid, we might as well be really far off the grid. Habakkuk is really tiny. It's you're going to find him after Nahum, after Micah, after Joel, before Haggai. So the book of Habakkuk. You never heard of him before. Okay, well, that's good. We're going to do something different then. A lot of people haven't heard of him before. Okay, yeah, it's a short book, pretty insightful into, the reason I picked Habakkuk is about some of the bigger themes that we see in the prophetic book. And it's a really interesting little dialogue between God and Habakkuk. So it's a little bit different than a typical prophetic book. So this is Habakkuk. So there's actually not a lot known about him. Interestingly enough, when you read Habakkuk's book, which is typically where we find our biographical information, the prophet kind of alludes to their life, talks about maybe where they're from. That's how we get our setting and our time period that the prophet is speaking within. But Habakkuk doesn't have any of that. It's very, very difficult to know who he is and where he's dated. However, in the book of Daniel, okay, I don't know if you're familiar with Daniel. Daniel's considered to be a major prophetic book. However, part of Daniel was written later. So we have the book, and then after most of the Hebrew texts were written, we have some books inserted. We call these the deuterocanonical books. If you've taken my Old Testament classes, you've heard this term before. Books that were written first in Greek. So the Old Testament is written in Hebrew. It was translated into Greek. When they translated it into Greek, it became known as the Septuagint. And then after that happened, there were some other books written that were written only in Greek, and the Jews don't consider them canonical. So there's parts of Daniel that are part of this deuterocanonical library. Baruch is part of it, 1st and 2nd Maccabees. Parts of Daniel. So that's why this says it's from the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament, not considered part of the Jewish canon, however, part of the Catholic canon, for sure. And then we get this allusion to Habakkuk here in this odd part of Daniel. And Daniel talks about Habakkuk being the child of Joshua, not Joshua the soldier, okay, but Joshua, some Joshua later, okay. Now, you know the word Joshua is a form of the word Jesus, right? So he's the son of Joshua, okay. Believed to be a descendant of the tribe of Levi. The Levites were the priestly tribe, which makes a lot of sense when you read the book itself. He was considered both a prophet and a psalmist. So we know the book of Psalms. There's one whole book that has 150 psalms in it, and there's all different styles of writing in the book of Psalms. A lot of them are attributed to King David, but there are royal psalms, and there are kingship psalms, and there are psalms of lament, okay? So when you read Habakkuk, which we'll see tonight, we'll see that part of the book seems to be a psalm. And so there is a suggestion that Habakkuk was a Levite, part of the priestly class, and he performed sacred music in the great temple, and that would have been how they performed psalms in the ancient world. So you can see how the interesting thing about Habakkuk is he's tying all of this historical and history of Israel kind of into a knot with who we think he is and when he was writing and how he was writing, okay? So keep in mind that little bit of who we think he is. Now, this is Scripture scholars' best guess. There's nothing absolute about this because it's not a perfect science, okay? So that's where we think, what we think we know about Habakkuk, all right? So as much as it's difficult to talk about who he is, it is a little bit challenging to date Habakkuk. And again, it's difficult to date it because there's limited information within the book itself. And we always find clues about dating in the books. So there is a little bit of limited information. Excuse me. However, for various reasons, scholars would suggest that he wrote sometime between 626 and 605 BCE. And the reason they would argue this is because Habakkuk is going to be talking about the Babylonians. And so we're going to see how that plays into it when we go through the book. So we won't spend much more time on that right for the minute. Any questions about any of that? So then the name Habakkuk itself, I love this. It either means embraced or it's a type of a garden plant. So I prefer embraced. But there's, when you look at this, I look at commentaries when I get ready for these classes. And, the commentary goes on and on about the root of the word, and it comes from Akkadian, and then it comes from Hebrew, and then it comes from, and I'm just like, that's way too much. This is good enough. It depending on how where the name actually came from, the original language, this is what we get. So I prefer to think of Habakkuk as being embraced, okay? So that's Habakkuk. So let's look at the structure of the book itself. It's 3 chapters, and it's a fairly well-organized book. You can't say that about all scripture texts, but Habakkuk's fairly well-organized. So what he's going to do, it's in 3 parts, and it's in 3 chapters. It's not exacting to say that one chapter ends exactly and another chapter begins, but this is kind of the layout. So he's going to set a problem before God, and God's going to give him a solution. And then he's going to set another problem before God, and God's going to give him another solution. And then at the end, and this is where we get this kind of psalmist imagery, we're going to get a hymn of praise. And this hymn of praise is going to talk about how God is this great warrior God, and how he's going to save his people. Now, this is what I will say about the book. There's a lot of imagery of war and fighting. So we need to remember to keep it in context of the time period in which it's written and a time period of which people were living and what was happening to the people of Israel with the Assyrians and then the Babylonians and the fall of the temple and all of that. This is our time frame. War is a typical, common way that they were living, fighting for the promised land back and forth, even though they had it and were given back when they got back after the Exodus event. They're still always battling for land back and forth, so this is kind of typical. However, when I read the book in its fullness, it certainly speaks volumes to the way we're living today, even if it's not all physical warfare. Does that make sense? And so again, translating these Hebrew texts into contemporary life and understanding, we have to take like all of this imagery and we have to say, okay, he was literally living through some of this stuff. How is this relatable to what we are living through? And there's a lot that we can relate to. Okay? So that's kind of where we are with this. So as far as the message, I was messing with this slideshow, and that doesn't look right. Let's see what happens here. He is really the most distinctive minor prophet. And when I say he's the most distinctive, that's because of his kind of having a foot in both worlds, where we have 2 chapters that are completely prophetical, and we have and the way that they're written, and then we have this 3rd chapter that's like this Psalm of Lament. So it's very distinctive, and it's very atypical in the sense that he is not preaching to the people, telling them there will be a day of retribution. He is having this dialogue with God, and he's talking to God about being judging the people. Like, what's going to happen? There has to be some retribution. What are you going to do about this? So it is really quite an unusual book. Okay? So we're going to get into it. Before I ask, is there anybody tonight who wants to read? You want to read? Okay, I'm going to give you the microphone. And then you and I, anybody else who wants to read? Okay, so let me give this to you, and then we'll give it to Judy. We'll kind of switch off, because I know people have to get tired of hearing my voice. So we're going to read the whole book. We might take a few verses out, but it's short, and so we have time to just really kind of delve into this, all right? So the first section we want to read is going to be chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. You got that, Mary?
How long, O Lord?
Start with verse 1.
Oh,
Does your book
sorry,
start with verse 1?
Yes.
Yeah, because there's a break in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is the oracle that the prophet Habakkuk received in a vision. How long, O Lord, must I cry for help while you do not listen? I cry out to you, violence, but you refuse to intervene. Why do you make the witness wrongdoing and confront me with wickedness? Destruction and violence confront me. Strife is everywhere, and discord abounds. As a result, the law becomes ineffective, and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteousness, and judgment become perverted.
Very good. Thank you. So, anything in there that struck a chord with you? Yes. She said Habakkuk is upset with God, right? And he's not, because God's not doing anything, right? So he's calling God to task almost. He's calling God to task and saying, here, I'm going to hand this to you. Saying, what's going on here, dude, right? So the first part, we talked about this last week maybe, the oracle, so he's receiving an oracle, right? Received in vision. We talked a little bit about that last week, right? I cry for help, but you do not listen. I cry out to you violence, but you do not intervene. Does that strike a chord with how any of you feel? Like the frustration sometimes of like, God, what are we going to do about this? Like, we gotta see some movement here. Things are falling. It feels like some things are just falling apart at the seams, and there's so much violence in the world. And, hello? So there's that, and there's also this willingness, which I love so much, this willingness to talk to God like this. So I don't know how you were raised and what your experience of prayer is, but for many people, they would not think it appropriate to be angry at God. They would think that is, you can't do that. God will smite you if you're angry at him, right? And yet, Habakkuk's bringing it. I love it. I love how Habakkuk is just like, I'm telling you like it is, dude. It's dicey down here, and you have closed your eyes. You've cast a blind eye upon us, okay? So we talk about him lamenting the lawlessness of Judah. So that's what he's talking about. Now, again, just a real quick, Judah is the southern kingdom. If he did indeed write when we think he wrote, he's writing in between the Assyrian captivity, which happened in 722, the north is gone, casting an eye to the southern kingdom, Judah, which will eventually be taken over by the Babylonians in 587. So he's sandwiched right in between these. And this is a common prophetic theme. And again, one of the ways we date books is when you can look to the north, and people are using it as an example of what's going to happen to the south, we can put it in the context of history. Okay? So he's lamenting the lawlessness of Judah, who can't seem to get it together with, they saw what happened to the northern kingdom, and they pretended they were better than that, but they're falling into the same trap here. Okay? So that's kind of what's going on here. So again, he's troubled by God's lack of intervention, and he talks about this violence. Historically speaking, we're talking about this violence is being perpetrated at the hands of King Jehoiakim, okay, real king in the south, who was slacking in the law. The law is a synonym for the covenant. So this is his gripe, so to speak.
And where he's actually saying, as a result, the law becomes ineffective and justice never prevails. prevails. Boy, doesn't that feel
So
right now.
speaking, say that again into the mic better.
Hello? Okay. As a result, the law becomes ineffective and justice never prevails.
So now we 21st century Americans living in the year 2025 probably look at that and say the law, the Constitution, the government, the things that we're so frustrated with, or maybe not, but the things that people, I should say, are frustrated with right now in our country. We have protests on Saturday, right? So we think of it in terms of that. What he is referring to is the covenant is ineffective. Now remember, the covenant is you fulfill your bargain, I fulfill my bargain. It's a two-way street. And when you don't do your part of the bargain, then my part of the bargain is going to fall apart. So he's literally saying to God, the covenant is not being upheld, but you have always promised us that we would be your people and you would take care of us. But the truth of it is the people aren't taking care of their end. And so God's like, well, let's sit back and see what happens. This is the cyclical reality of the entire Hebrew text. So the people have this covenant with God. They're in wonderful relationship. People break the covenant, and the people fall into despair and distress. And then they ask God for redemption. They ask God for forgiveness. God gives it to them, and then they rebound from that. And then they go along merrily, and then it starts to fall apart again. So that is very astute that you pick that up because it has such important application, both modern and historically. Okay? All right. Any other comments about that little introductory section? I already like Habakkuk. All right, so we're going to read 1:5-11.
Gaze upon the nations and see. You will be amazed, even astounded. You will not believe it when you are told what I am doing in your days. For I am stirring up the Chaldeans, that savage and unruly people, who march across the whole earth to seize dwellings of other people. They inspire fear and terror, and they impose justice and judgment according to their own standards. Their horses are swifter than leopards and more frightening than wolves at dusk. Their horses gallop on, with riders advancing them far away, swooping like eagles to devour their prey. They're all bent on violence, a horde moving steadily forward like an east wind. They scoop up captives like sand. They scoff at kings. They despise rulers. They regard every fortress with contempt as they build earthen ramps to conquer it. Then they sweep past like the wind and are gone, as they ascribe their strength to their God.
Okay. Now, this isn't written like a play, so it wasn't like Habakkuk, God, Habakkuk, God. But what's actually happening is in verse 5, God starts to respond to Habakkuk. Okay? So when you hear God responding to Habakkuk, it's basically him saying, I know what's going on. I'm not stupid. Like, the sins of Judah have not escaped my notice, right? Then he starts to talk about the Chaldeans, okay? Now, this group of people will become known as the Babylonians. So the way that this works is, again, this is one of those, like, we could go into a history lesson from now until the end of time. The Babylonians are coming to domination. However, the Babylonians are not able to hold on to that. And so the Chaldeans will become the new Neo-Babylonians because they're eventually going to take over. So when he's using the word Chaldeans, he's in effect referring to the Babylon. I have that backwards. okay? But they're going to, no, I said it right. They're going to eventually, that's who we're talking to. That's who we're referencing is the Babylonian Empire. So basically, he's saying to Habakkuk, these people, the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, are very powerful. They are going to sweep you away. They are going to come and they're going to take hold because they're merciless, they're powerful, and they have you in their eyesight, Judah. Okay? However, he says, the culprit who makes his own strength his God. That last line. What do you think that means? That's what my Bible is such a different translation than yours.
And are gone as they ascribe their strength to their God.
So what do you think that means?
I think that,
Talk into the microphone.
well, when I was reading it, I was thinking that what he's saying is they have a false god that they are using.
What are they using as their false god? They're using their power. So they're so prideful that they think they are that powerful that they can go up against the God of Judah and they can win. Now, maybe in the short term that's the case, but that's what's so interesting about this dialogue. God is saying to Habakkuk, I see what's happening, and guess what? I might have to let it happen, because that is what's going to happen. The Babylonians will take Judah. However, in the long term, this is a foreshadowing, right? In the long term, they can't ever beat me. I will redeem my people. I will renew my covenant. So it's kind of this talk about, well, you behaved badly, and we talked about this last week, right? You got to have some consequence for behaving badly, but I don't stop loving you. I just have to let you take your medicine for a while. And this is pretty harsh medicine because their whole world is going to get destroyed by the Babylonians. They're going to get deported. Their temple's going to get destroyed. However, after that happens, the people who are deported to Babylon, they become a covenant people in a different way because they begin to write down the scriptures. So you know how everything is not all good and all bad, but it feels all bad all the time until you have some hindsight in it? They're going to begin to gather their stories. They're going to begin to write their scriptures. They're going to start to worship in houses and create synagogues. They're going to go back and rebuild their temple, and it's going to be better than it was before. Okay? And the interesting thing about all of this is that Habakkuk's prophecies, his conversation with God, they seem to know this. If I was smarter and had a better education, I might argue this book was written later, written literally after the Babylonian captivity, because of this particular part of this chapter. But I certainly would not challenge the great biblical scholars of the world who have a different perspective on it. But that's kind of like what it sounds like, right? The foreshadowing of what's to become. All right? All right, any comments or questions about any of that? Somebody else want to read? We're going to do till the end of the chapter, 12 to 17. Somebody else want to read? Who's got it? Yes, 1, 12 to 17.
O Lord, are you not from everlasting, my holy God, you who are immortal? You have marked them for judgment, O Lord. You, O rock, have designated them for punishment. Your eyes are too pure to gaze upon evil, and you cannot countenance wrongdoing. Why then do you remain silent as you gaze on the treachery of the wicked, watching them while they devour those who are more righteous. You have made men like the fish of the sea, like crawling creatures without a ruler. The wicked haul all of them up with a hook or catch them in a net. They gather them up in a sign and then rejoice and exult. Therefore, the wicked offer sacrifice to their net and burn incense to their, is that sign? Sign?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For thanks to them, they live sumptuously and enjoy elegant food. Shall they then be allowed to draw their sword unceasingly and to slaughter nations without mercy?
Thank you. So that word sign or scene, however, I'm not 100% sure, but I think sign is correct. It's a drag net. It's like a fishing drag net where they're pulling all the fish together into a net, right? So this part is now, it's Habakkuk's time to talk, and he's challenging God's decision to let this evil befall the people. So he even, at the beginning of this particular pericope, talks about, like, why are you letting everybody get caught up in this? It's that old, why do bad things happen to good people? Why do we have to suffer for for the people who are making, and then we have to get into that whole idea, as we've already talked about, is social sin that can destroy a whole community because bad people are doing bad things, and we all get caught up in that dragnet, right? So again, very relevant, but Habakkuk is not shy about challenging God and saying, you see how wicked they are. This is how they treat us. They treat us like they can just go fishing and catch us up and kill us all, right? And you're just letting this happen. So again, this idea that Habakkuk feels like he has the authority to talk to God this way, which is very challenging and questioning of God and how he is taking care of the people. Like, where is God in all of this? It's almost Job-like, right? Like, where is God in all of this? So that's the end of chapter 1. Short and sweet. These questions where Habakkuk says, hey, what's going on? And God answers him, and Habakkuk doesn't like it. And he goes, I don't like that answer. I really don't like that answer very much, right? Any comments or questions about any of that in chapter 1? Feels like now. Anybody online or anybody have any comments or questions about any of that? All quiet? Okay. All right, so let's move on to chapter 2. Chapter 2:1, obviously, nice, simple, we're going to start with. It's kind of a little separator. I will stand at my guard post and station myself upon the rampart and keep watch to see what he will say to me and what answer he will give to my complaint. All right? So it's almost like Habakkuk is like, I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to, like when he talks about his guard posts, like the imagery, like I'm protecting my people with my word, like I'm challenging God to take care of my people. I'm the guard, and I'm just going to sit here on my rampart, and I'm going to wait to see what God has to say about this, right? So this challenge. All right, so then we get into the thick of chapter 2. Does somebody else want to read? Or the same person? It's a little bit longer, 2 to 20. You want to read? Here, let's bring the microphone all the way to the... Oh, were you going to read?
Yeah, I can read a little more. So you want to read?
It doesn't matter. Let me take it over here and we'll bring it back to you. Thank you. So we're reading chapter 2, verse 2 to the end. You're going to read all of chapter 2 for us.
Moreover, wealth is treacherous. Those who are arrogant do not endure. They open their throats as wide as Sheol and are as unstable as death.
What translation do you have? That is. Oh, start with verse 2?
I'm
Did you
sorry.
start with verse 2?
No, I started the wrong verse.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, but my translation is so different. I'm just worried I'm going to miss something. So start with verse 2. Then the Lord
2.
answered.
All right. Then the Lord answered me and said, write down the vision, inscribe it clearly on tablets so that it can be read easily. For the vision is for the appointed time. It will speak of the end, and it will not die. It will not lie. If it delays in coming, wait for it will surely come before too long. The proud man's heart is not upright, but the righteous man will live because of his faith. Moreover, wealth is treacherous. Those who are arrogant do not endure. They open their throats as wide as Sheol and are as unstable as death. They gather to themselves all the nations and make a harvest of all the peoples. Everyone should taunt such people and turn on them with mockery and fury and say, woe to you who stood up. What is not your own? Woe to you who stretch yourselves with Woe to you who enrich yourselves with goods taken in pledge. Will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Will not those who make you tremble wake up? Will you not become a victim to them? Since you have plundered many nations, all the nations that survive will plunder you. Because of the bloodshed and the violence you have inflicted on cities and all their inhabitants, woe to the one who amasses ill-gotten gains for his household, so as to set his nest on high and thereby evade the reach of misfortune. You have managed to bring shame upon your house by cutting off many peoples. You have placed your own life in jeopardy. The very stones will cry out from the wall, and the beam will respond from the woodwork. Woe to the man who builds a city by means of bloodshed and founds a town on the basis of iniquity. It is not in the eternal designs of the Lord of hosts that what the people labor for is destined for the flames, and that everything the nations exhaust themselves to achieve will come to naught. However, the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord's glory, just as the waters cover the sea. Woe to you who encourage your neighbors to drink, pouring it abundantly until they are drunk, so that you can gaze upon their nakedness. For you will be filled with wine, you will be filled with shame instead of glory, for you stagger in your drunkenness. The cup in the Lord's right hand will be passed on to you, and shame will overshadow your glory. For the violence done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, and the massacre of the animals will horrify you, all as a result of the bloodshed and violence you inflicted on cities that all who dwell in them. For what use is an idol after its maker has shaped it? It is only a presentation, a source of lies. And why should its sculptor place his faith in it? A dumb idol that he has made. Woe to anyone who says, wake up to a block of wood. Rouse yourselves to a lifeless stone. Can such a thing offer guidance? It may be overlaid with gold and silver, but there is no breath of life within it. However, the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him.
Thank you very much. Long reading. What did you get from that? They're going to get theirs. Thank you. They're going to get theirs. So here's Habakkuk, and he says, I'm just going to stand and I'm going to watch and I'm going to see what God does. And what God does is God says to him, look, dude, I want you to write this down. I want you to be the one who keeps track of what I'm saying is going to happen. And again, all this foreshadowing, right? So he keeps saying, woe to you. Who's he talking to? Who is God saying woe to? Woe to whom? It is to anyone now, today, in the year 2025. But specifically, he's talking to the Babylonians, right? And because, again, there's this whole thing where Habakkuk is looking to the danger that is going to befall. He can see it unfolding, and he's saying to God, why aren't you stopping this? And God says, well, I might not be stopping it, but guess what? They're going to get theirs in the end, right? Because woe to you who... And then he talks about all these terrible travesties that are going to be happening, unfortunately, many of which happen. So he says, the vision, this divine revelation about the future, write it down, and we will see. We will see how I will intercede. Okay? So some of the interesting language in it. And again, the translations are so different. But he was talking about the wine and the drinking, right? What was he talking about with all of that? There's a whole section in here where he says, and I'm not really sure where. Encouraging your neighbors to drink and pouring it abundantly until you are drunk, right? This idea that this is treacherous, right? So the Babylonians are like a drunk man who never gets his fill. So they become the drunk man who never gets their fill of violence, of taking what does not belong to them, of oppressing the people that they conquer, right? So he's equating them to this person who can't get their fill of wine, right?
It also, Marie, it also kind of sounds like, honestly, like some kind of weird corruption ring or corruption scandal. Because he's talking about, these people who will pour wine down your throat till you're drunk, and then they behold your nakedness. It's like they'll keep track of your evil deeds and try to use those to manipulate and everything. So it sounded like, an early form of whatever, like kind of leading others into corruption. I don't know, that's kind of what I saw there.
Very interesting. So what's going to happen is when the Jews get deported to Babylon, not everybody gets deported, right? The majority of them get deported. But there are people who will join forces with the Babylonians, right? So there's all this and everything all kind of happening at the same time, right? And so when Babylon falls, and that date is wrong, I apologize. When Babylon falls, what he's saying is they will be made to pay for what they have done to my people. Okay? They will be made to pay. And then he brings it around again to this idea that they're going to not just drink the wine of treachery, but they're going to drink the wine of God's wrath in the end. So again, we get this whole kind of imagery of this. This is where people get their imagery of the God of the Old Testament, who is wrathful and who will punish. But again, it's essential that we keep in context that in this time in history, the consequences that we're talking about are violent, warring consequences of people who are being forming nations and fighting over land. Okay? At the end of the day, though, what God's saying is these consequences are what will happen when you don't uphold the covenant. Now, the consequences today might be different for not upholding the consequences, but maybe not, right? Maybe not. So it's very interesting historical narrative versus a modern day interpretation of the narrative. Okay? Any other comments? Yes. Wait, I'm going to give you them. Here, let me hand this to you.
Okay, Habakkuk encounters the great problem of evil among peoples and individuals. The strong always oppress the weak unless God intervenes. The prophets explain the situation by seeing oppressors as the instruments of God's anger who punish the sin of the people. Like Job, Habakkuk rejects such an explanation as overly simplistic.
Very nice. And that's one of the notes in your Bible.
Yes.
Yeah, so again, God's saying, I'm using the Babylonians to give you your just desserts, and Habakkuk doesn't really like that explanation, right? He does not like it one bit. Any other comments or questions with that? All right, so we are in chapter 3. And we will read all 19 verses because it is literally a canticle. And as I said, this was often referred to as one of the Psalms, like a psalm kind of a writing. So do you want to read chapter 3? Okay, let's hear it. So one thing I will say, do you guys have notes, like it says in verse 1, does yours say prayer of Habakkuk the prophet to a plaintive tune? Yes. So that again is like that's an indication that this is probably more like a psalm and it would have been sung as a prayer, right? So the way that the interpretation is, you'll see it there. And then you're also once in a while going to see, at the very end it says, for the leader with stringed instruments. You're going to see kind of musical like suggestions, like musical. That's where that idea that this is really a sung prayer come from. Okay, so go ahead. Thank you.
What follows is a prayer of the prophet Habakkuk accompanied by a plaintive tune. O Lord, I have heard of your renown. Your work, O Lord, fills me with awe. Make it live once again in our own time. In the course of the years, make it known, and in your wrath remember to have compassion on us. God comes from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His radiance covers the heavens, and with his glory the earth is filled. His splendor is like that of the sunrise. Rays shine forth from his hand where his power lies hidden. Pestilence goes before him, and plague follows close behind. When he stands up, the earth trembles. At his glance, the nations panic. The eternal mountains are shattered along his ancient pathways. The age-old hills bow down. The tents of the Ethiopians are in distress. The dwellings of the land of the Midian are trembling. Are you angry with the rivers, O Lord? Or is your wrath directed against the streams, or your rage against the sea, that your horses are mounted and you drive your chariots to victory. You uncover your bow and fill your quiver with arrows. Into rivers you split the earth. At the sight of you, the mountains tremble. A torrent of water rushes by, and the oceans thunder aloud. At the glint of your flying arrows and the gleam of your flashing spear, the sun forgets to rise, and the moon remains motionless in the heavens. In fury you stride across the earth. In anger you trample the nations. You go forth to deliver your people, to save your anointed one. You shatter the house of the wicked, laying bare its foundations to the bedrock. You pierced with your arrows the leader of those warriors who stormed towards us like a whirlwind, ready to devour the wretched who were in hiding. You trampled the sea with your horses, turning the mighty abyss. I hear, and my body trembles. My lips quiver at the sound. Decay afflicts my bones, and my legs tremble beneath me. I wait calmly for the day of disaster, and will dawn on the people who attack us. Even though the fig tree does not blossom, and there is no fruit on the vines, even though the olive crop will fail, and the orchards will yield no food, even though the flock is cut off from the fold, and there is no herd in the stalls, I will continue to rejoice in the Lord and exult in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength. He makes my feet as swift as those of a deer and enables me to tread on the heights.
Nice. What are your reactions to that? Thank you. What are your reactions to that? Especially juxtapose it against chapter 2. What are you thinking? Anybody?
It's almost like being a little judgmental of what I almost felt like he was like saying to him, so you're going to do.
Sorry, Mike. Who is being judgmental? Habakkuk?
Yes.
Go ahead. Why
I was thinking that he was just being a little, I don't know, almost saying you're doing almost the same stuff they're doing.
Ah, okay. They're doing the same, you're kind of doing the same stuff they're doing. Okay. To what end?
He's saying no matter what you do, we will still be your people.
Okay. Do you hear any tone in it of Habakkuk saying, like Habakkuk has challenged God? Habakkuk has been like, why are you allowing this to happen? You need to do something about that. And then there's a tone of, however, you are so powerful, and you are so mighty, and you are so wondrous, that not only will you take care of us, but the very earth itself stands up and takes notice of you. So the very poetic language, the mountains and the skies and the star, right? This kind of poetic language that says, even the earth is going to bow down to your power and your authority, okay? And so there's a definite shift. I think, personally, Habakkuk sounds like he's trying to get some favor with God. Like, enough of this, like, challenging, like, now I have to say, at the end of the day, I don't understand why you're making the decisions you're making. However, you're the guy. And so you're going to do what you're going to do, and then you're going to restore us, because that's what you always do in the end. Did anybody get any of that? Or you feel like, yeah, here, microphone.
It kind of brought to mind the parallel of the Israelites escaping from Egypt. You know, you brought us here to drown, and then the seas, the earth, that, and then, you know, in the wilderness, did you bring us here to starve?
Right.
But, you know, like crying out, but maybe not quite with the confidence of Habakkuk.
Yeah.
But maybe that's grown.
That's a great analogy. I mean, Habakkuk is a pretty confident dude. He's not shy. Did you want to say something? Here. It's all right. I need the exercise. Got to get my knees cracking.
I got the impression, too, that Habakkuk was when he actually listened to God, when God told him, write down this vision. Because I know when I use more of my senses, it's just ingrained in me. So all of a sudden, God responds to Habakkuk and said, look at the vision, write it down. This is what's going to happen. I found that to be very comforting, for me anyways.
Okay, very good.
Reading it, I got the feeling that he's talking about terrible things are going to happen to the people who are afflicting Israel. But also I got the impression that he's bracing himself that they're going to be in for a really tough time, because he's talking about fig trees aren't going to bloom and they're not going to have any olive branches, but he's going to stay loyal to God even though everything's going to happen bad to Israel.
Yes. So at the end of the day, even though this is a terrible, terrible trial, what is my responsibility in this relationship? My responsibility in this relationship is to not understand God, but to trust God. And that's a really bitter pill to swallow. I think it is for me for sure. I think for people for all of time is we want to know why, right? And God's basically saying to Habakkuk, I'll tell you a little bit of the why, but dude, back off, because it's going to be okay. At the end of the day, you will be restored. But there's a lot of damage that you've inflicted, that the people, the kings, the Babylonians have inflicted on this relationship. And it takes time to repair this relationship. And you're just going to have to buckle up. But at the end of the day, I've never left you. I will never leave you. I will restore you. But you have to it's my way. It's not your way. Does that sound familiar? It does sound so much like Job, doesn't it? Although
Marie.
poor Job, I think he was a little less understanding than Habakkuk. I think Habakkuk at least saw the writing on the wall. Poor Job was blindsided. Job's like, I don't know where that came from.
Oh, I'm sorry. Cynthia online pointed out that there's another fig tree reference here in Habakkuk when we had a fig tree last week in Micah, and she was the one who pointed out last week that that George Washington, I guess, and Hamilton had made mention of these biblical passages regarding the fig tree.
Yes, it's a very important symbolic imagery. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so that's Habakkuk, right? We get this prophetic challenge, okay? And then at the end of the day, God says, write this down for me, dude. Quit challenging me. Sit up and pay attention, because I'm going to take care of things, all right? So what do we take away from this short little prayer book that we've read tonight? What are some of the takeaways?
God will punish us for our evil, for not following the covenant, but that he will also forgive us and bring us back to better times.
Okay, so that there's going to be, let's say, there are always going to be consequences when we break the covenant, but we will always be restored if that's what we so choose. And Habakkuk's kind of saying the Babylonians aren't going to choose that, right? It's the Jews who are going to choose that restoration. And those are still a time where we're saying those are my people, right? In this time in history, okay? The chosen people. Any other takeaways?
I kind of like thinking that he was saying, trust in me, I got your back. It's going to be okay in the end.
Yeah, it's trust me, I have your back, but it's going to be ugly for a while. It's going to be ugly for a while. I mean, honestly, how difficult is it for people to maintain faith in light of the Palestinian-Jewish war, in light of people's homes being destroyed by fires, hurricanes, what happened in Alaska last week? How difficult is it to maintain faith in light of those horrific, destructive things that upend people's lives, right? And yet, that's kind of what's happening here. And God's saying, you know, it's just the way it's got to be.
Marie?
Yes.
Is some of this maybe kind of a precursor, laying the groundwork for how Jesus kind of breaks it down maybe a little more clearly on the Sermon on the Mount, where he's saying, blessed are the people who are suffering, basically, in all these different ways, because so for us sitting here watching on the news, it's like, oh my gosh, this is happening. Oh my gosh, that's happening. For the people going through it, we've all lived through these moments where there's been a hurricane, where there's been destruction, and it's in these moments that, because everything else has been taken from us, that we reach back to God.
Right.
So the more suffering we're enduring, the more likely we are to remember God and build that relationship.
So let's take that another step further. The pridefulness of people who live in a developed world who don't need anything. We have clean water, we have roofs over our heads, we have food in our refrigerators, we have cars to drive, we have more than we will ever need in our lifetime. The pride of that is we are moving away from God. We live in a country that is moving away from God. People wouldn't say that, but that's what's happening. People are moving away from God in the true sense of who God is, okay? Because they don't need anything. That people who don't have anything rely on God to deliver to them. And that's the wine of Babylon. That's the cup of thinking that we are drunkards who can always get another glass and live this carefree lifestyle because we have what we need to survive. So at the end of the day, what does dependence on God really look like? And what does that look like in terms of social justice? So let's take it another step. Oop. Am I stuck? This doesn't want to click. Can you click? I can't work without my slides, people. It's all right? Is there something else on the screen that overtook it? Yeah, that happens. Okay. So, part of what we didn't talk about that is found in this chapter 3 is that Habakkuk does basically say, we know that you're going to, set your enemies low, but don't forget about the people. He's basically asking for mercy, right? Okay, so the message of the prophets. Well, we've already talked about this. The enemies are going to be laid low. There are consequences of bad behavior, but there is a very strong message of social sin and social responsibility that, to Hillary's comment, definitely lead us into the way that Jesus preached, right? We have an obligation to not engage in the behavior that leads us down the path that Judah walked down. We have a responsibility as a community to uphold the covenant so this does not befall us. All right? Now, that's why Jesus came, because we weren't living up to that responsibility. However, this is a very strong message of this prophetic book. And it's a very strong message of social sin. Very strong message of social sin. Like, even the innocent people pay for the sins of the powerful, because we get swept along, and we might get swept along because we don't object to it, because we're comfortable, because we're tired, because we're not going to engage. Who knows? But getting swept along is still getting swept along for whatever reason we're getting swept along, right? And then again, this idea of patience in God's time, not our time. So I have to say, like, that's the biggest message, me personally, because of where I am in my own life. That was the biggest takeaway for me, is when, like, I'm challenged by some things that are happening right now, and I want people to make good decisions that take care of my students. Like, that's all I want. Just take care of my students. Like, let me do what is right for my students. And there are decisions being made that I'm just like, that's not good for my students. But nobody wants to hear that. And so it's like, be patient. Keep plodding along. Keep doing what you're supposed to do. But it's going to happen, and it's going to happen in God's time if I'm being true to the mission, right? Which is very hard. Some of us feel marginalized in the country right now. Be patient. We have to keep praying. We have to keep doing the right things. We have to keep, right? Very much about what Habakkuk is talking about. And then this whole sense that we're called to reconciliation and restoration. So here's the thing about reconciliation and restoration. When we reconcile, sometimes we have to reconcile with people that we don't like. We have to reconcile with people that don't think like we think. There's no way to restore a broken system without allowing everybody to participate in the reconciliation, right? And that's a tough pill to swallow when people think they're right, which is happening all over the place because we have such a polarized society right now. And that's not just in the United States, that's all over the world, right? So this is a hard pill to swallow. So I just want to give you a quote from Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I contend that there is another kind of justice, restorative justice. It's supposed to say, here the central concern is not retribution or punishment, but in the spirit of Ubuntu, the healing of breaches, the redressing of imbalances, the restoration of broken relationships. I think Habakkuk, in its beauty, talks about this in the 3rd chapter. Like, we have to somehow restore what has been broken, but we can't do that without our willingness to engage, our willingness to walk through the fire, our willingness to recognize that God is, in the end, going to take care of things. It's a very powerful message in this little prophetic book. So, when we talk about this in the context of social justice specifically, who are the most vulnerable in our society? What are the means of securing basic rights? And how do we restore broken relationships? So if we look at Habakkuk, the Jews looked like they were the vulnerable ones in the society. However, they were the chosen. But they certainly looked like they were in a vulnerable position. Okay? Who are the people in today's society that are most vulnerable? And what are the means? Is it yelling at God? Is it telling God to get his act together? Is it marching? Is it simply standing in your food pantry and feeding people who are hungry? I don't have an answer for you. But this is what our justice teachings lead us to ask. How do we become the voice? How do we become the action? How do we walk that path to help people secure their rights? But we will never, ever do that. We will never, ever have peace unless we restore broken relationships. I was going to say that's the worst part. That's probably not a good word, but that literally is. It feels impossible for humans to do. But all things are possible with God. So the restoring of broken relationships are going to lead us to securing basic rights. It's going to lead us to making sure everybody has what they need in society. The challenge is you don't restore a broken relationship, you can't do it one-sided, right? I mean, just think about a marriage or a mother and a child who are in a broken relationship and only one of you is willing to come to the table. So sometimes maybe we're starting at the wrong starting point by saying, you're wrong and we're right, so we need you to be gone. Maybe the starting point is saying, how do we all come to the table and figure this out, because you're going to be right about some things and I'm going to be wrong about some things. And I think Habakkuk is very, very relevant to the 21st century, especially my experience of the United States and my experience of many of my neighbors. I think it's very relevant. And I guess my job is to be verse 3 and not be verses 1 and 2. I mean, chapters. Last minute comments or questions about any of this? Anybody? It's a sweet little book, but it sure is relevant. Yeah.
I think that it says a lot about humility, and I think that that's really the only way forward. And Habakkuk starts out scolding God. He's like, hey, dude.
Yeah.
What gives? And then, God's like, oh, dude, you haven't seen nothing yet. Just wait. It's going to get so much worse.
Yep.
And in the end, Habakkuk has the humility to realize how awful it's going to be, and yet the trust that God's going to make it all right. And at the end, he's like, and I rejoice in my Lord, even though God did not give him the answer he wanted, even though God said, I'm going to lead you through way worse turmoil and treachery. But it's all, I think it's, we think in terms when something bad happens, it's all used as a punishment, it's a punishment, it's a punishment. And one of the things that I've had to kind of learn, biblically, scripturally, is the difference between punishment and discipline. And, discipline is that act of a parental figure bringing you into discipleship, into better relationship ultimately. But it sometimes feels like a punishment because it's not what you wanted, but it's bringing you on a path that's going to make you stronger and make you a better disciple.
Absolutely, 100%. And that's so true that it is bookended with pride, screaming at God, telling God, what's wrong with you? Can't you see what's going on? And then at the end saying, well, apparently you do see what's going on and I better step away. Yeah, you think that's the important part?
Is that he goes, okay, sorry, but I know you're God. Well, what can I do?
Right. So he said, I'm sorry, I know you're God, but what can I do? So realizing that God is God and we only have we have a part to play in it, but it's not to be God. Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed Habakkuk. And I hope you guys are well and have a wonderful Thanksgiving and Christmas season. I decided it. I was deciding it week to week, so I have no idea. So, no. She said who was going to be next week. She had this illusion I planned this out for 4 weeks. No such thing in my life. thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate it. I love engaging with you, and I hope it's been good for your spiritual journey.